Hi there, I'm Skaji. I'm a practicing witch and a professional tarot nerd. I'm very glad you're here. You may have guessed from the title of this what the subject might be. At least I hope I remember to name it what it's about. I'm doing this one a little bit different. If you've watched my other ones, I'm stepping away from a more scripted idea to try to be a little more spontaneous. We'll see how this goes. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the ideas of divination and fortune telling. Are they the same? Are they different? And if they're different, how is that? I started writing this as a script about 2 weeks ago, thinking, I've talked on this before. This will be easy to knock this one out. I got a lot of stuff coming up. It's the holiday season. And it just didn't work out. I started one and it didn't go. Started another one and it didn't go. So I've decided to do this a little off the cuff. But the reason those other things didn't really work is as I was looking into these things and re-examining my ideas, I started to wonder a little more about them and investigate them more. And I guess that's one of the great things about doing these is it makes me think about what I think. And I believe that that's something that we all need to do, at least periodically, if not on a regular basis. Divination and fortune telling. Well, divination is not fortune telling. I said it. We'll let that sink in for a second. I don't believe they are the same. And that's where my investigation into my own thoughts came from. Why is that? For me, divination is a spiritual practice. Tom Cowan, in his work, Shamanism as a Spiritual Practice for Daily Life, says to divine means to discover, locate, or perceive intuitively. The Oxford dictionaries have a definition, fortune teller, a person who is supposedly able to predict a person's future by palmistry, using a crystal ball, or similar methods. And that's where, I think that's where the crux lies. Not in the supposedly part. We can forget that. Predicting the future and the intuitive spiritual side of divination. Divination itself, the etymology, comes from Latin, divinare. I don't speak Latin, I hope I pronounced that right. But to make out by supernatural insight. Insight. It's the perception or the accessing of non-ordinary information by some means outside of our ordinary senses. And you can gain that access with or without the aid of a tool, like tarot cards. So those are kind of my ideas. But as I got to thinking a little more about it, my irritation with the phrase fortune telling, it's kind of a pet peeve. Well, it's really more a feral peeve, sort of free range. I think it stems from something further back in my life. In the 90s, the internet was not what it is today. And you didn't stream your entertainment choices through your computer or a phone. You actually watched the big box, the television itself. And there were these things called commercials. And you used to see these commercials for 1-800 numbers or 1-900 numbers where you pay for talking with a real psychic. And it always, watching these commercials and these little clips of things, it really irritated me, even as a kid, before I ever got into any of this. And it felt kind of greasy. It felt kind of fake. And I think maybe that's where my irritation with the term fortune teller comes from. Hi there. Future Skaji here. I wanted to point out during the discussion of the telephone psychics that I saw in the commercials in the 90s, I am not implying that anyone who performs tele-readings, telephone readings, readings via video call, I'm not implying in any way that those folks are not legit. Hell, I've done some of those kinds of readings. I want to stress that it was the presentation of those specific kinds of services, the way they presented them, is what made me feel the way I did about them. These days, there are plenty of perfectly sincere readers of many stripes that seek to provide their clients with a good service in lots of different ways. So I wanted to make sure that I differentiated between the different types of folks. Back to past me. Disregarding skeptics, I don't feel like what I do when I work with cards or when I work in my personal practice, that any of it is fake. Because I feel that connection. I feel a connection to something much larger and wider than myself. And when I'm reading for clients, yes, I get paid to read for clients, but I'm not doing it for the money. I'm certainly not paying most of my bills with this. Mostly I buy tarot decks. But it's a part of service that I provide. So I think that that's where the differences come in for me. Divination is a spiritual practice. And fortune telling is a commercialization of that spiritual practice. When I read for clients, I tell them this. They sit down across the table from me and I say, this is how I work. If you have a question in mind, I don't want to know what it is up front. And there's generally 3 reasons that I do that. 1, if I don't know what you want to know, then I'm unencumbered by that knowledge. And by that I mean both myself and the client can be sure that I'm reading cards and not making up answers to a question I already know. I always give us a little time at the end for us to discuss if something I've said made no sense, or if something doesn't hit, we can talk about it. And I'm no means perfect, but I hit more often than not. The second reason that I do that is because sometimes the answers we need in our lives are not to the questions we have. And the third reason that I do that is because if I happen to say something I shouldn't know, because I've seen it in the cards, I look really damn cool. That usually gets a laugh out of them when I let them, when I say that one. Coming back from that rabbit hole. Strangely enough, I kind of got into the tarot as a skeptic. I tell this story in my workshops. Long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, some friends and I were out on a pub crawl, and we adjourned our little entourage. There were several of us, and along the way we picked up extra folks, and so our little adventuring party grew and grew. We went back to a friend's apartment, and he goes and pulls out a tarot deck, and he starts to throw down cards. Now, at that time, I was a science and engineering student, and very much in that science versus spirituality divide that seems to exist, much to the detriment of a lot of us. But I was kind of stuck in that. And tarot cards, hogwash, bunch of New Age crap. But he's reading for these folks, and of course we were all a little tipsy, or at least I was. Pub crawl, remember? And he gets done reading for folks, and I'm like, fine, do that for me, read for me. And so he throws down these cards. He looks at them for a minute, and he studies those cards. He leans back, and he says, I don't want to deal with this right now. And he begins to pick those cards up. I got irritated. What do you mean? Read the cards. What'd they say? What'd you say? I don't want to deal with this right now. I said, you're full of it. You're so full of it, your eyes are brown. Sorry to any brown-eyed folks out there. You're just full of it. I'm going to prove you're full of it. I'm going to learn to read these cards just to prove you're full of it. He goes, okay, wait here. He gets up, wanders off into his room. He comes back out and he says, here's a deck, here's a book. Call me when you have a question. And I did. I dove into those cards, and I was reading that book and looking at the cards, and I was hell-bent to prove he was full of it, and that the cards were just a bunch of hooey. And the more I read, the more questions I had. And I'd go back to him and I'd say, what about this? What's he talking about here? Well, here's a book. See, it's time where I lived. There weren't metaphysical shops, and the bookstores didn't have a huge selection of these kinds of things, and I was poor. I could have gone and bought them anyway, and there wasn't an online to draw information from, not the way we understand it today. And he was my source. He had this wonderful library. And the more I read, the more things began to make sense to me. So I entered the tarot as a skeptic. The sole purpose being to prove my friend was full of crap. And here it is over 30 years later, and I'm still trying to prove my friend is full of crap. But I do want to say thank you to that friend, and if you're watching this, you know who you are. We ran into each other years later. I was working at this coffee shop in the town where I work, a little metaphysical place. It's a cool place. You can see their videos on the YouTube too. It's called Books, Beans, and Candles. But at any rate, I'm working there one day. I'm in the kitchen making some coffee, and in through the door comes a customer, and I turn, and it's my friend. Hadn't seen him for years. So we catch up, and as we're catching up, I'm like, look, man, I got to know. What was it you saw that night that you didn't want to deal with? And he looks at me and says, dude, that was like 20 years ago. I have no idea. So I will never know what it was he didn't want to deal with. But I think more than anything, he didn't want to deal with drunk me. Skepticism got me into the tarot because I wanted to prove it was full of crap. And that's probably, too, because I had the idea that fortune telling was charlatanism. And I think that's how I got to where I am with how I feel about these things now. But what really is divination? And I've talked a little bit about that. Interestingly, as a spiritual practice, I think that divination, I think it's all summed up in that we're accessing a non-ordinary reality. To use a phrase invented by Carlos Castaneda, we're accessing a non-ordinary reality and pulling in information from outside ourselves, through ourselves. I was once on a panel, oddly enough, at a sci-fi convention, and there were like 6 or 7 of us readery types, different modalities, tarot, palmistry, sortilege, throw in the bones, astrology. We were discussing this very thing. What is it? How does it work? This divination thing. And of the 6 or 7 of us, we had something like 10, 12 answers. I don't know that it matters that we know how it works. And it may work through different streams for all of us. Just like some of us may use this social media platform or this other social media platform. We may get our news from this website. Some folks still buy actual newspapers where they're actually printed. We may get our information from different sources. But we're still drawing information. And I think that's a little more like how it works. Different ways of connecting to a larger pool of information. I found this researching for my workshop a while back. I always update them every time I give them with a little new information and whatnot, because I'm always learning something new. And I found this on Mashable.com, of all places. And it's the name of the article is Claiming Tarot in the Age of Social Media. And the author writes, there's a fundamental misunderstanding of tarot. Tarot is a form of divination, but the cards don't predict your future. They offer guidance to help get you there. More than anything, tarot is a catalyst for self-reflection and mental clarity. I think that sums it up very nicely. It's not about telling you what's going to happen to you next week. It's about taking a look at a weather forecast and gaining some insight as to how we can respond to that weather. I kind of see the movement of things, events, and people that we encounter in our lives as a part of a larger spiritual weather system, an energetic weather system. And if we can gain some insight on the best ways to respond to these things, ways that we can use strengths we already have, or work with or mitigate our weaknesses, the better we can do those things, the better we'll be able to move through life and have a fulfilling experience with it. There's an author that wrote an immensely huge, giant book called Holistic Tarot. It's Benebell win. And this is a section. This is a fortune telling serves no benefit. Purporting to predict the future with certainty is detrimental to the seeker. It diverts the seeker's focus from the present and the seeker's own spirituality, and it redirects it to a purported future outcome. So with that, we can see that if we're going, oh, next week I'm going to come into a bunch of money. Well, and I sit and wait for life to happen to me. I wait for that money to show up. I think it's more that we may see next week. It seems that there may be some opportunities. And here are some ways to help you take advantage of those opportunities. It's not that divination isn't a predictive art, but I think for the most part it's an insightful art. But I think it's a tarot and other divinatory methods and practices are more for helping us navigate our human existence. I forget, I think it was a French Jesuit philosopher whose name I have forgotten. It may show up floating around my head here. And I'm probably paraphrasing. We are not humans having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. I think I've covered everything I kind of wanted to cover in this one. I'll sum it up by saying divination is not fortune-telling. In my mind, at least. Divination for me is a part of my spiritual life. Reading is not only a practice that I perform for myself, but it is a service that I provide to those in my community who come and seek it. And it's a very serious practice for me. I try to have fun with it. I try to enjoy the practice itself. But it is a very serious spiritual practice. And I think I've covered it. Again, my name is Skaji. I'm glad that you're here. I wish you to have safe journeys, and I'll see you next time.